Live for God Studio Productions.
Today on Living Power.
The city, you're under siege. And so bless the Lord when things like that begin happening, because God has shown his steadfast love in the past, and he's going to show it again. Listen, if God has intervened in your life in the past, why wouldn't he intervene in your life again? Do you think he loves you any less now? No. He loves you as much now as he loved you then. He loves you as much now as he did when he hung on the cross.
This is Living Power with Dan Hurst.
So Jesus is wrapping things up with his disciples. And we're looking at, Jesus had been teaching, we've wrapped up the study on end times, but now Jesus is moving into that transition of what he's going to be crucified in 2 days, actually. And so he knows it, nobody else knows it. And so what we're looking at has to have that in the background. We have to understand that what we're looking at today is in Jesus' mind about what's coming and what he has to expect, what he knows is going to happen, and what the disciples don't know and what they don't understand. So let's look at that. Our passage is in Matthew chapter 26, beginning with verse 1. When Jesus had finished all these sayings, he said to his disciples, "You know that after 2 days the Passover is coming, and the Son of Man will be delivered up to be crucified." Then the chief priests and the elders of the people gathered in the palace of the high priest, whose name was Caiaphas, and plotted together in order to arrest Jesus by stealth and kill him. But they said, "Not during the feast, lest there be an uproar among the people." Now, Jesus is with his disciples on the Mount of Olives, and it's a Tuesday. The Passover would begin on Thursday afternoon with the slaughter of the lamb. And so that's how close we are to what's about to happen with Jesus. And Jesus now reveals, for the very first time, he reveals to his disciples that he's going to be arrested and he's going to be crucified. Now, I find it curious that the disciples were silent on this. There's apparently no response, because I'm guessing because it didn't make sense to them. But there is no indication that they responded to that. They may have been a little stunned at it and may have thought, "Oh, Jesus, you're wrong. That's not going to happen. It's the Passover. That's just not going to happen." And so there's no response from the disciples. Think about that. No response when he tells them, "I'm going to be arrested in 2 days. During the Passover, I'm going to be arrested and I'm going to be crucified during the Passover." Now, there's an incredible irony in what Jesus is saying. The judge of the universe, King Messiah, the glorious Son of God, is about to be judged, found guilty, and killed for being the judge of the universe, King Messiah, the glorious Son of God. That's so ironic when you think about it. And Jesus is preparing his disciples for that. Guys, this is coming. I know it's going to happen. And they don't respond. Now, Matthew introduces the actions of the chief priests and elders in verse 3. And these are probably the clerical and the lay members of the Sanhedrin. And they met with the high priest. The word palace is the word aula, and it is actually a word which means a place of open air, like a courtyard. And so no doubt Caiaphas' place was quite large, and more than likely had this giant courtyard. Apparently it did. And so they went to meet with Caiaphas. Now, there is an interesting, what seems to be a conflict in the scriptures regarding who the chief priests and elders met with. Matthew says Caiaphas. Caiaphas is called the high priest in Matthew and John. But in Luke and in Acts, which was written by Luke, it says that they met with Annas. Now, why is there this conflict? The truth is that it's not really a conflict. Annas was the high priest who had been deposed by the secular authorities, the Romans in particular, and they replaced him with Caiaphas. But the Jews didn't accept that because Old Testament law said that a high priest can't be replaced until after his death. So to the Jews, Annas was still the high priest because he had not died. And yet they had to accept Caiaphas as a high priest because he was given that role and that responsibility. So they basically had two high priests, and they referred to both of them as a high priest. And in fact, John says in chapter 18 that when Jesus was arrested, he was first taken to Annas, and then Annas sends him on to Caiaphas. And so there is no conflict there. Interestingly, by the way, Annas was Caiaphas' father-in-law. And so no doubt Annas continued to exercise great authority, but behind the scenes, because he was still considered high priest because he had not died. He does die, I think like 3 years after this, but that has nothing to do with it. The point is that there's not a conflict. If somebody says, oh, the Bible is conflicted there. No, it's not. This is exactly what was happening. And some people refer to Caiaphas as the high priest and Annas as the high priest. Now, the words that are used in verses 3 and 4 have an interesting connection to Psalm 31. Psalm 31 is the lament of a righteous sufferer. And that Davidic psalm is prophetically connected to the crucifixion. I want you to look at some of the verses in Psalm 31. Into your hand I commit my spirit. You remember when Jesus said that? When he was hanging on the cross? We'll be looking at that later. Not today. But into your hand I commit my spirit. You have redeemed me, O Lord, faithful God. You have known the distress of my soul. Jesus said that to his disciples. He said, I'm distressed. My soul is heavy. And that's when they went up to the Garden of Gethsemane to pray. And he was under incredible duress and stress. All of my adversaries I have become a reproach, especially to my neighbors, and an object of dread to my acquaintances. Remember, all of the disciples abandoned him, except one. And they didn't want to be around because whatever was going on with Jesus could happen to them. And so they abandoned him. He was a dread to them. Verse 12 says, I have become like a broken vessel. Verse 13, for I hear the whispering of many, terror on every side, as they scheme together against me, as they plot to take my life. But I trust you, O Lord. I say, you are my God. I had said in my alarm, I am cut off from your sight. Remember when Jesus said, my God, why have you forsaken me? So Psalm 31 really refers to, it was prophetic to the crucifixion. And what we're seeing in Psalm 31 is happening already. And there's a balance here, if you will, of what's happening historically with what was prophesied in Psalm 31. Now, the religious leaders had wanted to arrest Jesus several times, but they had not been able to, mainly because they knew that would start a riot. And that would have brought down the wrath of Rome on them, and they certainly didn't want that. Rome expected them to behave themselves, and they trusted those religious leaders to keep the people at peace. They didn't want the leaders didn't want a riot because that would mean that Rome would come in and go down on the religious leaders, put the hammer down on them, and they would lose authority and lose power. And so they didn't want to do that. So now they have to do something. And they want to do something with Jesus, about Jesus, and they want to get rid of Jesus. And they finally realize that they need to do this secretly, and they need to arrest Jesus secretly and kill him without the crowds knowing what happened. So that's in their mind. That's what they're thinking at this point. In Matthew 26, verses 4 and 5, we already saw that. They plotted together in order to arrest Jesus by stealth and kill him. But they said not during the feast, because there would be an uproar among the people. Now, I want you to look at the cynicism and the hatred pictured in verse 4. They plotted together. Now, That's happening in the world today. You know, what we're seeing in the world today is Jesus is telling us, hey, something's happening, something's coming, get ready for what's happening. And we're kind of like the disciples, we're going, what? You know, I mean, we know that we're in the end times. We know we're facing that. We know that Jesus is coming back. We look at all of that, but we're just kind of like the disciples. Okay, you know, once you've heard it so many times, it doesn't really matter to us, or it doesn't really sink in, and we just kind of like, okay, I know this is happening, but so what do I do now? And then the other side that we see is what's happening in verses 3 through 5 in Matthew, and that is the world is plotting against Jesus. They continue to plot against Jesus. The term that means that when it says that they plotted together, the word that's used there means that they took counsel with each other. They brought all their ideas and all their plans together to come up with a solution to get rid of Jesus. And their solution was to arrest Jesus by stealth. Now, the word arrest is not like what we think of. It wasn't like, you're under arrest. It wasn't that sort of thing. At this point, they're not thinking how to legally get rid of Jesus. That happens later on. We'll see that, probably start seeing it next Sunday. But this idea to arrest Jesus by stealth means that they decided that the best solution was to arrest, means to take by force, in the way that it was intended, the way that they were intending it. So they intend to take him by force, by stealth. And so that means that they decided that the best solution was to kidnap Jesus and then kill him. So their intent was to take Jesus where people didn't, in a way that people wouldn't know. And they would kidnap him, and then they would kill him. That was the plan. And then the next verse says, don't do it during the Passover because that'll cause a riot. Now what we're going to see next Sunday is plans changed. Because now Judas, as we'll see next Sunday, Judas comes along and decides, hey guys, I can make arrangements for you to get Jesus without people knowing it. And he offers that. He says, I'll do it for 30 pieces of silver, which was the price of a slave, by the way. He said, I'll do it for 30 pieces of silver. And he says, I can turn him over to you. And so that's exactly what happens. He knows that Jesus spends a lot of time in the garden praying, and he's by himself. And so he plots to get them to find Jesus when he is alone. And he's quiet, and things are quiet, and there are no other people around him except some of the disciples. And so that's what the plan was. We're going to kidnap Jesus, and then we're going to kill him. Now, in verse 5, they decided, look, we can't do this during Passover because there's too many people in Jerusalem. And they were right about that, because the Passover, things happen in Jerusalem. The population in Jerusalem during the Passover would become 5 times greater than normal. And the population at that time it was probably around 500,000 to 600,000 people living in Jerusalem. That means that during Passover, Jerusalem would be overrun anywhere from 2.5 to 3 million people. And so it was like this incredible giant festival that was going on, and people were just wall to wall everywhere in Jerusalem. So the religious leaders decide that they're going to wait until after Passover to kidnap and kill Jesus. Now, there are 2 things that we need to draw from these verses in Matthew 26. 2 things that I want us to understand about what is going on and how we can apply that in our lives. And so, Jesus and his disciples are in Jerusalem for the Passover. And it was the time of celebration. And yes, there was a great degree of solemnity to that, because of the Passover was when they would celebrate that the Jews were set free from Egypt. And you know, the angel passed over the houses that had the blood sprinkled on the doorway. You remember that story? And so that's where the Passover is referring to, how the angel passed over those homes and let the people live. So the firstborn live. So there's celebration, but there's also, it's a remembrance of how God has protected them and provided for them. So this time of celebration and solemnity at the same time was an exciting time. And Jesus announces to his disciples that he's going to be crucified And he says that it's going to happen during the Passover celebration. And the disciples just can't understand that. It doesn't make sense to them. He's told them, I'm going to be crucified. I'm going to be arrested. And he had told them several times that he was going to be arrested. He had not told them that he was going to be crucified. This was the first that they heard about that. And so it just didn't make sense to them. But I want you to see a couple of things from this passage. The first thing I want you to see is that God is up to something even when it doesn't make sense. In your life, you can count on the fact that God is up to something even when it doesn't make sense. And I want to tell you something. As we get closer to the end times, things are not going to make a whole lot of sense. It's going to be more difficult to understand what's going on the closer we get to the end times. When God is up to something, sometimes it just doesn't make sense. I've been in the ministry for over 45 years. And I can tell you that everyone goes through conflict, through loss, through brokenness, through confusion, through a sense that God has abandoned them. By the way, even Jesus went through that on the cross. Everybody goes through that in their life. And there are times in our lives when we're just so overwhelmed with emotional pain and sometimes physical pain that it just doesn't seem worth it. And our situation just doesn't seem to make sense. That happens to everybody. And there are things that happen in our lives that just don't make sense. And I can promise you, as we get closer and closer to the end times now, more and more things aren't going to make sense. But I can tell you this, God does have a plan and a purpose for your life that isn't destroyed or even deterred by what's going on in your life. The remarkable truth is that God is up to something in your life. And it's backed up over and over in the Word. Job 42:2. Boy, if anybody had a mess in his life, I know that you can do all things, he said, and no plan of yours can be thwarted. Now that's a promise if you want to accept it that way, that God says his plans are not going to be thwarted. He has plans. He has something that he wants to do. And here's something else that you need to understand. When things don't make sense in your life, that's when God is up to something. When things don't make sense in your life, that's when God is up to something. God has not left anything to chance. He's left a lot of things up to choice, but he has not left anything to chance. And here's some good news. God knew about those issues in your life way before you did. In fact, he knew about it before he even created your life. He knew what you would be going through, the things that you were going to be dealing with in your life. He knew about that before you were even born. Look at Psalm 139, starting with verse 15. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place. When I was woven together in the depths of the earth, your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. God knew what was going to go on in your life before it happened, before you were even born. So nothing's going to happen in your life where God goes, oh, whoa, didn't see that coming. God knows what's going to happen in your life, and he has already planned for it. He knows what to expect, and he knows how you're going to get through this, whatever circumstance it is in your life. Now listen, if God planned you before you were born, and by the way, that's a little hard to believe, knowing some of you. But it's true. The Word says so. If God planned you before you were born, he's not going to let this confusion or this loss or this devastation or this no direction in your life change his plans. In his infinite knowledge and power and wisdom, he can somehow use the circumstances in your life or ignore the circumstances in your life to accomplish his plan. Now you think about that. When God looks at those issues in your life that are so overwhelming and so devastating, God says, I can use that. Or I can continue with my plan in your life, and that's not going to interfere with it. That's what God is up to. Now, there's nothing that has happened in your life that caught God by surprise and thwarted his plans for you. Because your circumstances and your screw-ups in life aren't bigger than God. There was a little girl who, and her younger brother, and they were eating lunch one day, and the little brother spilled his drink and started to cry. And the little girl spoke up and she said, "Oh, it's okay. Mom is bigger than the mess you made." Now I want to tell you something. God is bigger than the biggest mess you've made. God is bigger than the biggest mess you've made. When you've made a mess, listen to me, when you've made a mess, God is up to something in your life. Because God is bigger than the biggest mess you've made. And when God seems furthest away in your life, that's a sure sign that He's up to something in your life. One of the things that happened in my life when I became a Christian, it was before I became a Christian, and it happened at William Jewell College. I was in the library one day, and somebody had, you know how people write, graffiti and stuff on walls, and there were little cubicles around little desks where we would study in the library, and somebody had written on the wall, "If God is so far away, who moved?" And that struck me, and because I thought, I believed that there was a God. I knew that God existed, but He wasn't in my life. And when I saw that, I realized God didn't move. I'm the one that moved away. I'm the one that got further and further and further away from God. And it is important for us to understand that when we're going through issues in our life, difficulties in our life, things that are happening in our life, that it is those times that God is up to what? Up to something in our life. Now, how can I be so sure? Because God makes it very clear in the Bible that He's at work in the needs of our life. You've heard me say this over and over and over again. Philippians 4:19, "My God will supply every need of yours according to His riches in glory in Christ Jesus." So God is at work in the needs of your life. God works in the needs of your life. That's how you know what God is up to. Whatever the needs are in your life, that's where God's at work. Now, the second thing that I want us to see in today's passage is this. God is up to something even when the world doesn't make sense. Boy, we need this. God is up to something even when the world doesn't make sense. The actions of the religious leaders of Jesus' day didn't make sense. I mean, the things that they were doing, you think about it, it didn't make sense. Why would they want to kill a man who had no intent of harming them? He had no intent of overthrowing the government. He spent his day sharing God's love, healing the sick, raising the dead, teaching the wisdom and truth of God's word. Why would you want to kill somebody like that? And yet that's exactly what the world is doing today. Why would they want to disparage Jesus? People hate Jesus today. And they even plot together ways that they can destroy Christians and damage Christians and damage Jesus. That's going on today. People are still that intent on harming, on killing Jesus. Sometimes the world doesn't make sense. For example, it makes no sense to me that there are hungry people in the world when every day America throws away, listen to this, these are true statistics. Every day, the average, every day, America throws away 40% of our food. Every day. That's the average in America. It amounts to $162 billion in waste annually, according to the Natural Resources Defense Council. And that, what we throw away, that could serve 64,516,129 meals. That amount alone would provide 3 meals a day for every hungry person in America, and it would still leave 12 billion meals for others in the world. And then you add that to the other nations, because we're not the only nation in the world that's throwing food away. Globally, get this, globally, we waste 1/3 of all food produced for human consumption. That's according to the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. That averages out, listen to this, that averages out to 1 pound of wasted food per day for every human on earth. Now, it doesn't make sense to me. We could feed every person in the world today if it were a priority. But sometimes the world doesn't make sense. Explain to me sensibly why one country would want to control another country. I've studied this for years, and I thought, why would one country want to take over another country? It is unsustainable. There is no country in the world that is wealthy enough to be able to overtake another country and sustain both countries. It can't happen. And, you know, it's amazing to me how countries think that they can control another country. And it's the best thing for that country. Do you realize that the highest amount of natural resources in the world are in the poorest countries? So why not work something out with these countries so that they can mine their natural resources, make money, and support themselves and bless us in the process? I'm talking about all nations that think that way. You know, that's the sensible way to do it. But sometimes the world doesn't make sense. Explain to me how one human can be so driven and full of hate to want to kill another human being. Explain to me how one person can be so driven and full of hate that they would want to kill another human being. Sometimes the world doesn't make sense. The psalmist David said it this way in Psalm 31. Look at this. We've already looked a little bit at Psalm 31, but Psalm 31 verses 12 and 13, I have been forgotten like one who is dead. I have become like a broken vessel, for I hear the whispering of many, terror on every side, as they scheme together against me, as they plot to take my life. Sometimes the world doesn't make sense. And so what should we do when the world doesn't make sense? What do you do when the world doesn't make sense? Well, I want us to go back into Psalm 31, since we were talking about how this has to do so much as prophetically with the crucifixion. But it is a psalm for the suffering, for the righteous suffering. And so it's important for us to understand that that's going to go on. There is going to be suffering in the world. But what do we do about it when things just don't make sense? And we know that God's up to something, but what do we do when things don't make sense? And I want to give you 4 things. Looking at verse 14 through 17 in Psalm 31. But I trust in you, O Lord. I say, you are my God. My times are in your hand. Rescue me from the hand of my enemies and from my persecutors. Make your face shine on your servant. Save me in your steadfast love. O Lord, let me not be put to shame, for I call on you. Let the wicked be put to shame. Let them go silently to Sheol. By the way, that's not saying that let them go to hell. That's saying let them go to a place of darkness and separation. That's the idea there. The idea is let them be the ones that suffer in silence and in the darkness. So look at these 4 things in this passage. In verse 14, here's what you do when the world doesn't make sense. And you need to start doing this today. First thing is trust God. Verse 14, trust God. Why? Because He's up to something. You can trust Him because He is up to something. When you don't know what to do, trust God because He is up to something. Number 2, in verse 15, trust God's timing. My times are in your hand. God's timing is perfect. God knows what He's doing. He knows what has to happen, when it has to happen. And so far in my life, God has never asked my opinion about that. I've given it to Him a few times, but my times are in His hands. God's timing, trust God's timing. He's up to something. And let Him be the one that is responsible for what happens. Listen, I've noticed this. God lives at 11:59:59. Have you noticed that in your life? God lives at 11:59:59. And that's where He's at work, at 11:59:59, in my life and in your life. Trust God's timing. He's up to something. Number 3, verse 16. Let God shine through you. Let God shine through. Make your face shine on your servant. In other words, let me reflect your face. Let me reflect. Let your shine reflect off of me. Now, this is another way of saying grace, because grace is the divine influence in your life and its expression through your life. Grace is what happens when God does something in your life and it reflects through your life. That's what this is talking about. Let your face shine on your servant. In other words, let God shine through you. Why? Because He's up to something. I want God to shine through me when He's up to something. And that means He's going to shine through me all the time if I let Him, because He's always up to something in my life and through my life. Number 4, let God, in verse 17, let God defend you. Let God defend you. Now, I'm really good at defending myself verbally. The things that I have said to people, usually after they're gone, after we've had a little confrontation, after they've embarrassed me or insulted me or said something, I should have said, I'm good at that. I'm good at defending myself. I'm so good at it, I'm not good enough. Because it's up to God to defend me. Lord, let me not be put to shame. And the only way that that's going to happen is if I'm not in control, if God's in control, because I will put myself to shame. I will embarrass myself. You can count on it. I call on you, Lord. Let the wicked be the ones that are put to shame, not me, Lord. You do something in my life. You take over in my life. I'm going to let you defend me. I will tell you that I have learned this lesson the hard way in my life many times, where I was accused of something and I didn't do it. And the only thing I could do was say that I didn't do it. And it was my word against another person's word or something like that. That has happened many, many times in my life. And I remember it happening in the ministry where I was accused of things that I didn't do. And I remember a very wise man in my life. He was my senior pastor at the time. He said, let God defend you. Let God defend you. And I just simply said, okay. We're going to see where this goes, because I'm pretty sure that I'm going to be in a mess here. And I just said, okay, I'm going to let God defend me. I'm going to be quiet. I'm going to be open, transparent, available. Whatever anybody wants to know, I'm going to tell them. But I'm not going to take it on as it's my quest to defend myself. And you know what? God defended me. And that's happened over and over and over again. You see, you're God's ambassador. You're not the world's ambassador. You don't belong to anybody else in the world. You belong to God. And God knows what He wants to accomplish in and through your life. And He knows that He has to defend you in order for that to happen. So let God be the one that decides how things are going to work out in your life, what He wants to do in and through your life. Now, He may give you the wisdom and give you the instruction to bring somebody else in for counsel or bring somebody else in to work with you on something like that. That may be the way that God does it. But let God be the one that instructs. Let God be the one that leads you, that directs you in the path that He wants you to go. I want to close with the rest of Psalm 31, 21 through 24. Because in these verses, we see what we're studying about today. That we can depend on God when things just are falling apart in our life. And they don't seem to make a whole lot of sense. What do? Verse 21 says, "Blessed be the Lord, for He has wondrously shown His steadfast love to me when I was besieged in the city." Now stop, or in a besieged city. Stop right there. When your life is in a mess, when there are things going on in your life that just don't seem to make any sense, you're in a besieged city. That's what that means. You're just kind of overwhelmed. You're overrun with things that are going on around you and in the city. You're under siege. And so, bless the Lord when things like that begin happening. Because God has shown His steadfast love in the past, and He's going to show it again. Listen, if God has intervened in your life in the past, why wouldn't He intervene in your life again? Do you think He loves you any less now? No. He loves you as much now as He loved you then. He loves you as much now as he did when he hung on the cross. God loves you. The whole point of going through things that happen in our life is that God wants to reveal himself in your life and through your life. So let the Lord, when you are in a besieged city, let the Lord show his steadfast love for you. Verse 22, I had said in my alarm, I am cut off from your sight. God, where are you? I can't see you. I don't know what's going on. But you heard the voice of my pleas for mercy when I cried to you for help. Remember those times when you have gone to God and God has responded. And I can promise you, by the way, that those times, it didn't seem like God was anywhere around at the time. And you went to him and you cried out for mercy and you wondered where God is, just like you're wondering now, as the things are similar to what was going on. And you're just thinking, where is God? You thought the same thing then when you cried out to God, and God responded. And he will respond again. Why? Because he loves you. And because he is up to something. Verse 23, love the Lord, all you saints. Love the Lord, all you his saints. Don't want to leave that word out. Because you are his saints. You belong to him. I should start calling, and you could start calling me Saint Dan. And I'm going to start calling you Saint Don. That doesn't make sense. But don't laugh, Pat. Saint Pat doesn't quite work either, does it? But we need to learn that we belong to him. We are his saints. He has the purpose. He has the plan that he wants to accomplish in and through your life. It's his plan. And you are his saint. So he's not going to let things fall apart unless he is up to something in it. So love the Lord, all you his saints. The Lord preserves the faithful. What is faith? Who can give me the definition of faith? I've been teaching this class now for 25 years. Who does not know that faith is trusting obedience to the known will of God? Thank you. See, sometimes this is why we spend so long in a particular book, because you're slow. And I have to teach you. I know you know it. I'm giving you a hard time. So if we're faithful, that means that we're trustingly obeying God's known will. That's what the faithful do. The faithful trustingly obey God's known will. So the Lord preserves the faithful, those who are trustingly obeying God's known will, but abundantly repays the one who acts in pride. I don't know about you, but that verse scares the fool out of me, because I have a problem with pride. How could I not? It's just, we have a problem with pride. It's just something that happens in our lives, and we're focused on ourselves and what I want and what's best for my life. And that's pride. That's arrogance. And I suffer from it. So that bothers me. I want to be the faithful one. I don't want to be the prideful one. I want to be the one that trustingly obeys the known will of God. Verse 24, and be strong. Oh, yeah, sure, right. I try to be strong. No, you don't get it. Be strong. How does that happen? Two things happen for you to be strong. Number one, let your heart take courage. And number two, wait for the Lord. That's how you are strong. Number one, let your heart take courage. Now listen, how does your heart take courage? The courage has to come from somewhere. It doesn't come from within. You don't have the courage within you. It has to come from somewhere. Where does it come from? The one who has courage, God himself. So be strong by letting your heart take on courage, letting God begin to put courage in your life. That's why Psalm 37:4 is so important. Delight yourself in the Lord, and he will put his desires in your heart. Now, it says he will give you the desires of your heart, but that's what it means. He will give you. He will put his desires in your heart. So if you're delighting in the Lord, you're trusting in the Lord, you're focusing on the Lord, you're wanting to please God, God begins to work and do what He wants and reveal what He wants in your life. And He begins to motivate your heart to do the things that He wants you to do. It's the greatest motivational verse in the Bible. Delight yourself in the Lord, and He will put His desires in your heart. And one of the things that He will do is He will put courage in your heart. That's the first step for being strong. The second one is wait for the Lord. Hardest thing in the world, isn't it? It's the hardest thing in the world. It's the hardest thing in the world for me to sit down and shut up. I just don't want to do it. I want to keep reminding God that, hey, you promised. Hey, God, you said. Hey, God, let me point something out that you said right here in the Bible. I just want to remind you, God. You know, and God says to me, sit down and shut up. I don't know if He talks to you that way, but He does to me because He has to. And I get so confused sometimes, and God says, would you just sit down and stop? It's just amazing to me how ignorant I can be sometimes. When I know what the truth is, and I know what I'm supposed to do, but I'm just too dumb to do it sometimes. And so are you. Let me rephrase that. So are we. We're like that. We do that. But here's what God says. When you're facing these issues in your life, when life doesn't make sense, when things are happening that just are unfathomable, how does this happen? How did it happen? Why did it happen? And by the way, it's never wrong to challenge God on those. People have said, oh, you should never ask God why. I think you should. I think you should ask God why. So that God will tell you why. So that He'll reveal that. It's okay to ask God. By the way, I think it's okay to argue with God. And I'm good at it. But I know that when I'm arguing with God, I'm acknowledging that God is the one who is responsible and in control. So it's never mean, it's never hateful arguing, but it's God like, God, what are you doing? Well, by saying that, I'm saying, God, you're in control. I'm trusting you. I don't know what you're doing. I wish you'd tell me. And God says, sit down and shut up. Okay. I'm going to take courage, let God put courage in my heart, and I'm going to wait for the Lord.